Donald Trump's latest pick for Director of National Intelligence already facing some headwinds. Politico reporting, quote, Congressman John Ratcliffe is largely unknown among the lawmakers who would confirm him, a circumstance that could complicate what appears to be an already narrow path to confirmation. That narrow path due to questions over whether he might use the position to advance Trump's political interests. That coming from comments like this one on Fox News.
I think the first thing that we need to do is make sure we don't do what the Democrats have done. They accuse Donald Trump of a crime, and then they try and reverse engineer a process to justify that accusation. So I'm not going to accuse any specific person of any specific crime. I just want there to be a fair process to get there. What I do know as a former federal prosecutor is it does appear that there were crimes committed during the Obama administration.
Some Republicans have been hesitant to come out in support of his nomination. The New York Times writes, quote, the cool reception from members of the president's own party reflected the split at hand. For what is supposed to be perhaps the most nonpartisan job in Washington, Mr. Trump selected one of the Capitol's fiercest political warriors. Joining the conversation, congressional reporter for Politico, Melanie Zanona. Melanie, thanks for joining us. So the math of the Senate, where this confirmation fight will take place, 53 Republicans right now, 47 Democrats. That means if all the Democrats were against this, and there's a bit of an if there, but let's say that, then four Republicans coming out and saying no to this could sink it. Is that a realistic possibility right now?
It's definitely going to be a tough confirmation battle, that's for sure. The reception that we've seen thus far is Republicans have been very lukewarm on Ratcliffe. And that's because, first and foremost, they're worried that he's way too political for this nonpartisan post. He is someone who's been out there as one of Trump's warriors. He's criticized the FBI and the Russia probe. He's also cast doubt on the idea, which the intelligence community has said, that Russia interfered in our elections on behalf of the Trump candidacy. Number two, they're also worried about his qualifications. He's only been on the House Intelligence Committee for a few months now. And number three, there's now new questions, thanks to reporting from ABC and other outlets, about whether he was misrepresenting his resume. They said that even though he was appointed as the chief of the Anti-Terrorism and National Security Unit for Eastern Texas, that he actually did not put any terrorists behind bars, despite claiming otherwise. So that raises some very serious questions about not only his qualifications, but also whether he's being honest, and I think that's something that senators are going to definitely dig into when this vetting process gets underway.
Yeah, Michelle, it's interesting to look at some of the comments, or really the lack of comments at this point in some cases from these senators. You get a sense with this job, with the things that are being said about Dan Coats, the outgoing DNI, this job occupies a different space, at least theoretically, a different space in Washington that's supposed to be a little bit above politics. Even this is somebody the president's appointing, but that does seem to be giving, at least initially, pause to folks who might otherwise be inclined to give the president his team.
The idea of this man in that role is utterly terrifying from both, both because he's such an ideologue and because he seems to be a fabulist. And so Dan Coats has been out there trying to raise the alarm about potential Russian and other foreign attacks on the 2020 elections. To have somebody who will instead spin the intelligence to Trump's liking, both to the public and probably to Trump himself, right? Somebody who seems to have no regard for the underlying facts of American intelligence gathering. To have somebody like that in that role is, I think it would have seemed inconceivable a couple of years ago. It's a sign, again, of how kind of inured we've become to all of the outrages of this administration. And so we're going to see just how much every single Republican has fully capitulated to Trump, right? Because I'm sure that most of them know that this would be a disaster, but they've also shown themselves, completely unwilling to stand up to him.
Well, so some of the names here, just again, with the four Republican defections, at least theoretically, could sink the nomination. Richard Burr, Susan Collins now facing a very difficult re-election in May next year. Rand Paul, especially when it comes to intelligence matters, sometimes he can be a wild card. Marco Rubio, Ron Johnson. How do you look at the prospects for confirmation, Noah?
Well, Ratcliffe is going to have the opportunity to make his case for individual senators. I don't think he's made a very good case now. He should be taking the temperature down. He's not, which is a bad indication. Senate Majority Leader put out a statement the other day. It was very lukewarm, as we said earlier, suggested that this is a position that should be occupied by somebody who's dispassionate and above the fray, and we hope to see that in a nominee. That seems to me to signal that they're displeased with this nominee. And the Republican Senate is not a rubber stamp for Donald Trump. They have forced nominees to withdraw their nomination in the past. They have not confirmed judges that have been put before them. If they are dissatisfied with this nominee, I suspect they will. There will be at least 4 nominees who could force him to withdraw his nomination and avoid a protracted and detrimental confirmation fight. It wouldn't be the first time. It wouldn't surprise me. However, the president does usually get the nominees he wants. It is his prerogative to have the nominees that he wants. So if this is the fight that Donald Trump wants to have, he can certainly have it. The Republican Senate would be well advised to push back a little bit because, as you say, and as I agree, this is definitely a role that needs to be occupied by a professional and not a partisan.
Well, let's just see. The president just this afternoon talked to reporters about the prospects of his nominee being confirmed. This is what he had to say.
I think that John Ratcliffe is going to do an incredible job if he gets approved. He's got to get approved, but I think he'll do a great job. I hope he gets approved. I think we need somebody like that there. We need somebody strong that can really rein it in because, as I think you've all learned, the intelligence agencies have run amok. They've run amok.
Basil, the kinds of senators we're talking about, the wild cards here who maybe fancy themselves more institutionalists, who maybe in some cases are willing to say no to this administration, does that kind of pitch for this nominee work with them?
You know, after Mitch McConnell decided to kill bills related to Russia interference, I don't put it past any of these senators, no matter how tenuous their reelection is, to do what the president wants to do. Quite frankly, it is terrifying, but I am at a place right now where if the president says that he wants this, and presidents typically get their nominees, that I would imagine that the leadership and even some of these other senators, as long as there's nothing like directly in their face and their protests at their front door, I imagine that he gets confirmed. He auditioned for the job during the Mueller hearings, and we all saw that. And so, you know, as long as you have members of the House and Senate willing to do that in front of Donald Trump, consistently advertise and audition for him, you know, people are going to fall in line. That's what's going to happen.
And Melanie, just quickly, that idea, because I think folks remember, and maybe it was their introduction in some cases to Ratcliffe, was that a factor in him getting this nomination from the president, what he did with the Mueller hearings?
Yeah, I don't think it was a coincidence that he came out so strongly. He had this one infamous line that even Trump seized on that said, even though the president shouldn't be above the law, he's certainly not below it either. And the New York Times reported that he had actually met with Ratcliffe a few days before. So it certainly looked like an audition, but now he has to audition for the United States Senate. And I think that's going to be a much tougher audition for him than with Trump.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.